Look, I get it. You're watching other writers pump out tons of content with AI while you're still staring at a blank page. And you've probably got other people telling you that it's like you're trying to use the typewriter while everybody else is in the computer age. And every day this goes by, you're thinking to yourself, am I just wasting time developing writing skills that are about to become completely useless? Here's what those AI writers don't want you to know. They're all starting to sound exactly the same. Meanwhile, you have something that they're losing, which is the ability to think originally. So in today's video, I'm going to show you exactly how to turn that disadvantage into your biggest competitive advantage. Because while everyone else is racing to optimize their prompts, you are going to master the fundamentals that actually create lasting value. More specifically, I'm going to show you exactly how to use your writing, not just to communicate valuable ideas, but to actually generate them. You'll also learn how to break bad writing habits that you learned in school to make sure that readers can actually perceive that value. Then I'm going to show you how to cut your writing time in half using a pretty simple two-step system that eliminates the torture of trying to write perfectly while you're still figuring out what you think. This video is going to let you in on my expert writing system, and I've broken it up into 8 phases that, if we practice and master, are going to help us rise above the deluge of AI slop that's just been flooding the market so that we can all get back to writing that makes a difference. And this first phase is the foundation, because you're probably sitting there thinking, do I even have anything worth saying? Will anybody care about my article or my book? But here's the thing. You absolutely have valuable knowledge. That's not the problem. The problem isn't what you know, it's how you're packaging it. Many of you are writing like you're still in school, trying to impress a teacher, and that is killing the relationship that you have with your reader. So in this section, we're going to learn how to ditch all the academic stuff that's just been weighing you down and write like the expert that you actually are. So here, we need to learn how to stop writing like we're still in school. Because everything that they, or honestly I'm an English professor, so I'm just as guilty as this as anyone. I've been teaching writing for 10 years in a university, and so I know this as well as anybody, which is to say that everything we teach you about writing in school was for our sake. Okay, think about the system. We have to grade your papers. We're not real readers. We're not reading for value. Or rather, the things that your teachers value are different than the things that real readers value. Teachers value simplicity, they value certain patterns. We want to make it easy for us because we've got to grade like hundreds of these essays. So we're all looking for our own particular writing patterns. And when you make that easy for us to find, we give you a good grade because we can move on quickly to the next one. That's not how real readers work. Expert writing works differently. It says, here's the problem you're having, and here's my solution to it. Bit of a tangent here, but do you know what the word essay means? It comes from French. It's the verb to try. J'essaie, tu essaies, il essaie, nous essayons, vous essayez. It means attempt or try. And when this genre was kind of conceived, that was the idea of it. It was like a writer is looking at a problem and saying, I don't know. That's a hard problem. Let me try to see if I can answer it. So, there's no such thing as an essay about your favorite food or should we wear uniforms in school? You know, these bogus topics that we give you in essay writing at school. Instead, at the beginning of an essay, you should always be able to identify the question that you're trying to answer. And I tell my students that they should look at that question and say to themselves, I don't know. Because too often we look at a question and we already have a preconceived notion of what our answer to that question is going to be. So instead, I kind of make my students practice out loud saying, I don't know. What kind of evidence would I need in order to answer this question? Anyway, we'll talk more about that kind of process of discovering what you think through writing a little bit later, but that's the real meaning of the word essay. But this is where so much writing fails because many writers learn these patterns from school and then they go out there in the real world and it's like they're still trying to show your work and your knowledge instead of giving people, readers, what they actually need. One quick example of the type of writing patterns that come out of school school is opening with a background or context, right? In our essays, we kind of set the context. And that's a writing pattern that appeals to teachers, because when we're writing for a teacher, we're trying to demonstrate to them that we understand the context of the problem. But think about readers, like actual readers who want to find a solution to a problem, right? They open your essay because the title promises them a solution to a problem. Do they want to read through all this background and context? No, they want to know the answer to their problem. They don't care how much you know, how much you've researched. They don't care about any of that. So that's just one pattern that's a kind of hangover from the writing that we learn how to do in school. And we really need to forget that, because in the real world, we're writing for somebody different. Another pattern that comes out of school writing is when we explain our whole thought process. We say, okay, here's an interesting question. And at first I thought this, but then I read this article and it kind of made me think that. And then I was a little bit confused. And so I talked to my friend, right? Just so you give an outline of your whole thinking process. And ultimately, the answer that you arrive at comes at the end of the essay. But that drives readers crazy. They don't want to know the whole evolution of your thought process. They want to know the answer to the question. So those are just two examples, background knowledge and the process of your thinking, that come out of school writing. And we really need to abandon that and remember our readers and their experience as they move their way through our text. And basically what we need to do here is stop trying to demonstrate what we know and the ideas that we have, and instead start helping people make better decisions. Step 2 is to understand the difference between communication and getting results. Because most people think that writing is kind of like a garden hose. It's a medium through which ideas get transferred from one person's head to another. I guess we have garden hoses running between our heads in this example, but the point here is that it's a medium of exchange, right? I have a fully formed idea in my head, and then I put it into writing, and then you can decode that writing and put it into your head. That's what some people think, and that would be the communication model of writing. But if you think about it, that's a pretty self-centered version of writing that doesn't really take into account the reader or their interests, anything about the reader. They're just there to receive whatever we put into the writing. And the reason this kind of writing fails is that communication assumes that the reader wants to hear your thoughts. But if I'm honest, they don't. They really don't. What people really want is a little bit of help getting from where they are to where they want to be. Now, I don't want to sound too utilitarian about this. Of course, we're not all writing, how-to guides. But even in the world of ideas, we are developing solutions to conceptual problems, right? Readers are going through the world and they're trying to understand the way the world works, and they run into a wall somewhere. There's something they don't understand. Well, we can provide them an idea that gives them a better understanding of the world. So even though we're not showing them how to cook my grandmother's spaghetti or, any other kind of how-to guide, what we're still showing them how to do is to replace one idea with another idea, one that will help them better navigate the world. So instead of a garden hose where we're just funneling ideas from our head into the reader's head, the text can be more like GPS directions, bringing them from where they are, the reader is, meeting them where they're at, and bringing them to where we want them to be. So the way to do this is to really stop asking the question, how do I explain my ideas? What's the best way of writing my ideas, right? Let go of our ideas. Now, of course, I'm a big advocate of developing your own ideas, and when we talk about the writing process, we're going to get into how you can use writing to generate your own ideas, but for now, whenever we're preparing our text for readers, we need to let go of the idea of explaining my ideas and start asking, how do I move readers from point A, where they are, to point B? And I love this idea of the text not as a capsule of our knowledge, but more like a map, because it turns it into a kind of journey that we usher the reader through rather than just a brain dump. Step 3 is all about value, value, value. A lot of my coaching clients at the beginning of our relationship will start off obsessing over being clear and organized, right? They want to know, how can I make my text really strong? How can I make it concise and clear and make the ideas really pop? But what I find they ignore is whether anyone actually cared. We can't worry about concision and organization and clarity in the writing before we've asked the question, is there value in this? Who's going to value it? Because if your text is clear and useless, it's useless. If it's organized and useless, it's useless. If your text is persuasive and useless, it's useless. Readers do not care about clarity, organization, or persuasion. They only care about value. And so before we talk about any of the mechanics of your writing, what we really need to get clear on is, where is the value in this? Because in the real world, of course, nobody is reading you to give you a grade. If you're not helping them make better decisions or solve problems or just understand the way the world works, then they're going to stop reading, regardless of how clear, organized, and persuasive the language is. All right, so to get really tactical about this, it's important to ask yourself, what are readers going to be able to do differently after this? Now, their behavior might change or their thinking might change. That is, if your text solves a practical problem, then it's going to show them how to change their behavior in order to get what they want. If it's a conceptual problem, then they're going to change their thinking, and that thinking is going to be upstream of other behavior that they change. More on that a little bit later, but ultimately, what we're trying to clarify here is that value is not what you find interesting. It's what actually helps readers accomplish their goals, whether that is a change in behavior or a change in understanding. But it's impossible to know what readers find valuable if we don't know our readers. So step 4 is all about knowing exactly who you're writing for. Because when I ask writers who their audience is, they generally say something vague like business people or general audience or content creators, which is like shooting at a target that you can't even see. And this is something that a lot of writers will push back on me about because they inherit some bad ideas from the world of fiction and try to bring it into the world of nonfiction, right? So in fiction, you'll hear writers saying, oh, I never think about the audience and I don't care who reads my book, you know? And that might actually work in the world of art. But in the world of nonfiction writing, it doesn't work at all, because when you have a generic reader, well, honestly, like generic readers don't exist. They just don't exist. The only thing that exists are real people with specific problems. Those are the people who give their attention to our work. In the world of fiction, it's a fantasy world. It's a conceptual world. They're reading for entertainment. In the world of nonfiction, nobody reads this stuff for entertainment. They read it to solve problems. And so in order to understand what problems we're solving here, we need to understand, who are these people? Now, I don't mean to lecture about this, but I'm speaking from experience, because if you go back and watch my early videos, you'll see a great example of this. I think a lot of my earlier advice was not specifically tailored to any one type of writer. And because of that, because I didn't really have a clear sense of who the writers are on the other side of the camera, well, a lot of my earlier advice might have seemed a little bit vague or just indiscriminate. Things like, don't edit while you're writing. Well, like, yeah, okay. But, once I started meeting with more writers through these coaching consultations, I started to learn more about the specific problems that writers were having. And so, maybe you don't have a specific coaching offer that'll let you meet your readers, but it's still really important to get a clear sense of who am I writing this for? Because that's going to tell you what the problems are about, and you need to know what those problems are in order to position your ideas as the solution to those problems. So it always comes back to the reader, and the more specific you can get about that reader, the better your writing will become. This is the place where I begin all my coaching sessions. I was working with a writer recently who had a whole outline for a book, and he was basically ready to hit the ground running, and we just had to stop and set it all aside. And we took 3 steps back and began with, who is this for? Well, in fact, we begin before that, because when we're drafting a book, we think, what do you want to achieve with this book? Because then we can say, okay, well, who needs to read this book in order for you to achieve that goal? And that's when we can get laser focused on the reader, right? Who is this person who's going to read this book, and how can I design the book in order for that person to help me achieve that desired outcome? So the point is that, like, and here's the other thing, is like, if you don't have a clear sense of your reader, then if you're working with somebody like me or like an editor, then you're just going to be receiving a lot of their opinions and pet peeves. And like the editor isn't the person who you're writing for. Like, a good editor is not going to be beating you over the head with their pet peeves about writing the way that your high school English teacher did, right? They're going to really help you get a vision for who your reader is and to question whether your language choices are really connecting with that reader. So if you don't know who your reader is, then your editor is just forcing their opinions onto you. Because in the world of nonfiction, we are practicing the art of persuasion, right? We have ideas, whether that is, people should take a certain set of actions or people should take a certain set of beliefs. But in either case, we are trying to persuade the reader to accept our ideas. And the thing is, people don't like to change their ideas, and they definitely don't like to change their behavior. So there's going to be resistance from that reader. And if we are to be effective at persuading them, then we need to anticipate their objections. If we're not thinking about their objections and their reservations, then it's just this one-sided argument that falls flat. And you've probably had this kind of experience. Like, let's say you're reading a book about an argument that you care about, and the author has a set of opinions that you don't really agree with. Well, if they don't address your objections to their opinions, then you feel overlooked. You feel, well, I don't accept this because they didn't address my objection. They didn't answer my question. I can think about, some controversial topics, and sometimes you want to read the work of people who you disagree with. So you can't persuade people if you don't know what their doubts are. And you just waste time proving stuff that maybe they already believe while ignoring the real obstacles to that persuasion. So if you really want to persuade your reader, then it's great to talk to them. It's great to interview them if you can, to study their responses to similar ideas, or you can read the responses online. But no matter what, your writing should beat them to their objections, right? You should anticipate their objections at the moment they object and have your counter argument right there waiting for them. Good writing is like telepathy. That's what Stephen King says, and I think it's true. Step 6 is, once you've identified this community of readers, then you want to start to learn their secret language, right? So every professional or social community has coded language that signals this matters. So this is really fun. Again, whenever I'm working with writers, I'll have them pick 4 or 5 examples of other prominent books or writers in that niche, and we'll find some standout articles from them, and then we'll go through and look for value-coded language. All the most successful writers do this. They have these inside all social groups have codes, slang, and jargon, that kind of thing. But there's a subset of that special language which they use to signal value. In like super academic humanities groups, you'll see them say words like problematic, like this problematizes. All right, many of us probably don't like that particular word, but it is popular in the humanities when they say, oh, let's problematize this subject. So that is an example of the kind of value-coded words that exist in the humanities. But it doesn't matter if it's in academia or content creation online or, Substackistan or whatever it is. There are code words that communities use to signal value and problems. So whatever niche you're writing in, whatever reader community you're writing for, you want to examine some, examples of prominent texts in that field and look for value-coded language because you're going to mimic those patterns. All right, some other classic value-coded words are words like however, critical, enables. These words aren't just transitions. They're value signals. It's like a flag. It's like, here's the important part. And if you don't know this language or you bring language from another field into this new domain, then your ideas just aren't going to land. So you really want to be almost like an anthropologist. You're reading through the kind of prominent texts in this community and you're looking for that inside language that they use to signal value and status to each other. All right, it's really good to keep a running document of words that you find in this reader community because those are the words that will make your readers pay attention. All right, the 7th step to writing without AI is to focus on what your words do, not what they say. And this is a big thing that AI advocates miss. Right? A lot of these people who are so excited about AI, they say, wow, look at the amazing writing that AI can produce. And when you really come down to it, I think what these people must believe is that words just have fixed meanings. And so the fact that a computer can produce these words is just remarkable because there's nothing under that. It's just the words and the patterns. That's what counts. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a layer beneath that, and those are functions, right? The same sentence can perform completely different functions depending on where it's placed in a text. So for example, take a phrase like sales were down 15%. Right? That could be a problem. That could be evidence. That could be background information. It all depends on what you, as the writer, need it to do. When you only think about the content, you miss how your readers are actually processing the information. And this is what the AI advocates just don't understand, because they end up with these pages and pages of words in these beautiful patterns that don't actually perform reader functions. They don't answer reader questions. They don't anticipate reader expectations. They're not thinking about a reader. They're just arranging words in patterns. So the way to fix this is to think about not what your sentence says, but what is the sentence doing? Right? So you want to design every sentence almost like a tile in a path, something that's moving the reader from point A, where they are at the beginning of the text, to point B, where you want them to be. Every sentence and every paragraph is a tile along that path. And if you can't tell me, if we're editing or something, if you can't say, here's the job that this sentence is doing, right? This sentence is contrasting from the previous idea. This sentence is introducing a problem, an objection from the reader, whatever. If you can't identify the job of that sentence or that paragraph, delete it. All right, so that was the foundation out of the way, and we're probably going to unpack a few of those ideas a little bit later on in the video, but now what I really want to get to is the process. We need to know actually how to perform this writing, because a lot of you who are using AI in your writing are probably doing it because you think, I don't have time to write. But here's what's actually happening. You're making writing way harder than it needs to be. You're trying to think and write for readers at the same time, which is complete torture. So the steps that follow are going to show you the 2-draft writing system that's going to cut your writing time in half. The first draft is just for you, and it's going to be the space in which you can generate your own ideas. And the second draft is for readers. And when you stop trying to do both at once, your writing suddenly becomes way easier. So step 8 is to give yourself permission to write terrible first drafts. A lot of writers start off saying, I don't know what to write about. I don't have any interesting ideas, or I haven't lived an interesting life. And I really don't buy it. And I'm not even just trying to be like a rah-rah writing coach, you can do it. I really do mean everybody has their own ideas. This is kind of a deeper point about knowledge creation, and we can get into this in another video, but it's true. Every human on earth has generated their own knowledge. We all have something new to say. So I really don't buy it that I don't have anything to write about. You definitely do. The problem is that your ideas and your expertise and the questions that you're working on, it's too complex to sort out, to think in your head. There's this image I remember, I'll put it up on the screen here, from Gödel, Escher, and Bach, which shows a kind of cognitive map. It's like a depiction of the inside of somebody's head, and it has these strings making these connections between these, very loosely formed concepts and ideas, and it looks like a plate of spaghetti. Honestly, I think that's what the inside of our mind looks like, right? It's a total mess. We think we have opinions, but we have these, half-baked and not fully formed things floating around, and it's not until we bring it up into language that they actually become something that resembles a coherent thought. So before writing, your expertise you have, but it's just floating around in this kind of soup. So you need to bring it out, and you need to use writing in order to give it this kind of shape and coherence. But if you try to write perfectly while you're still thinking, then you'll do both badly. So you really need that first draft to work through your ideas and make your own connections. This is a messy, iterative process through which, there's a lot of crap that comes up that's never going to see the light of day. And a lot of it is just going to be evidence of your own confusion. But you write and you write and you write so that you can start to give your own thoughts some shape and coherence. So many writers will mix up these two processes, and these are two different writing patterns, right? The first one is writing for you. It's trying to sort out your own confusion. The second one is trying to present these ideas to readers in a way that they will find coherent and logical and acceptable. And these are two different systems, so we really have to keep them as separate and distinct as possible. The first draft belongs to you, so make it as messy as you need. Follow your own natural thought processes. Ask questions, think out loud, don't worry about contradictions, just note them and come back to them later. Don't worry about readers at this point. You're not trying to publish anything. You're just trying to get your ideas out there onto the page so that you can see them and start making sense of them. It's like writers are worried if readers will understand what they think. And it's like, you don't even know what you think. So how can you worry about readers worrying about that? Right? Step 9 is to start to understand the difference between writing patterns and reading patterns. So the way that you think interferes with how readers process information, right? So think about patterns abstractly here. Like the way that you're writing, you're going to be developing your ideas, in these kind of patterns. But when readers come to your text, they have a different set of patterns. They're using your text differently. And if you write your text using writer patterns, then readers are not going to be able to interpret it, or it's going to take them a lot of work to interpret it, right? It's going to interfere with their reading process, right? Those messy first drafts, you can't write them using reader patterns because you don't even know what you think yet. So you're not going to put your thesis up here because you don't even know what the answer to the question is. So you're not going to discover the answer to the question until you get to the bottom of the page. But now you've got to adapt this into reader patterns. So the point here is to understand what are reader patterns and how can you make sure that your writing patterns aren't interfering with their reading patterns. Because when readers hit these interference patterns, it slows them down and they get frustrated and they walk away from your text thinking that it's just not clear, right? They don't really give you anything specific. They don't say, you interfered with my reading patterns. They just say, oh, the writer isn't very clear or it was disorganized or something like that. What they're saying is that they didn't know how to use the text. They couldn't find the information that they were looking for. So the thing to look for is a certain set of patterns that are typical among writers, working through their first draft. One of them would be chronological organization, right? Which is the process through which you, the writer, discovered things, right? First, you discovered this source, then you had this new idea, then you had a question come up, right? That's your process of working through this essay or this text. But that pattern of organization is not very useful to a reader who is trying to find the answer to a question, right? Another one is when writers have a lot of background information at the beginning. And again, readers kind of want the meat and potatoes up front and then for you to unpack those as they go. So there are these different patterns that belong to the writer and the reader, and you want to learn to identify them and to keep them distinct from each other. And once you're able to identify these writing and reading patterns, then step 10 is to completely rewrite your draft. Now, why am I emphasizing that word completely? Well, most people like to revise their draft, right? They've got their thinking draft, call that draft 1, and they just think, oh, I just need to move this paragraph up here and semicolon there, and ta-da, it's all done. No. Start a new document. Okay? The first one is for you, and I really mean that. It's just for you. So don't try to copy and paste from that. That thing is a mess. That's your own thought process, right? Now now that you have all the work done, you want to write afresh from the reader's perspective. How are they going to move through this text? Right? We don't want to bring in any of those writer patterns into this new text. So we're going to completely rewrite this draft. And the way to do that is to start with the idea of where is my reader now? What is driving them to pick up this essay or read this Substack or open this book. Like, why are they interested in this? Something about the title. What's going on in their life that would make them interested in this title? What's going to get them through the first sentence? What's going to get them through the first paragraph, right? How do I move them from where they are now to where I would like them to be? Again, as we mentioned earlier, we're going to think of this text not as a repository for information, but as a path. It's like a guided tour that we're going to move them through. But that can only happen when we really think about where they are and what they believe and what objections they're going to have and how we can swiftly move through that as a guide, not as an adversary or anything like that, but how are we going to usher them to this newfound value that we've discovered through our own writing? And in order to think about how to shape this second draft for the reader, we need to talk about structure, because a lot of writers are paralyzed because they want their book or their article to be perfect. So they just throw in everything they know. They want to be exhaustive and complete. But this, of course, can be quite overwhelming, especially for readers who, again, just come to our text with one simple thing. They just want the answer to a question that they care about. And so when we throw in all this extra information that makes it complete and exhaustive, well, based on their purposes and their reading patterns, all that information becomes, well, frankly, useless and overwhelming. And so in the steps that follow, I'm going to give you a problem solution framework that's going to let you organize your ideas around the problems of your reader. And this is a great way to take the guesswork out of structure. You don't have to agonize anymore over how long should this paragraph be, or should I break up, this into two sections or anything like that. You're going to know because it's all about your reader and the way that they develop their understanding of your solution to their problem. Right? So the first step to building this problem solution architecture is to always start with what's broken. All right, so a lot of writers will open their text with background information or context because that's how they learned the topic. But of course, readers don't care about your learning journey. What they need is to have their problem solved. This background information is so inconvenient. Like, as a bit of a analogy here, do you remember like in the blog days when, bloggers, they would make money by how long you would spend on their blog because you would see more ads. And so you'd go online to, you try to get a recipe and you'd have to scroll through, all this text. This writer would write this whole history of their grandmother and where this recipe came from in the old country and all this kind of stuff. You would just scroll through that kind of impatiently because you just wanted the recipe. But honestly, if you go on Substack or like a lot of the kind of independent publishing platforms these days, that is what a lot of the text feels like. Now, they're not doing it for ads, but they're doing it because they think they need to give readers background information. And readers hate that, just like in the recipes. Readers don't care about background information. In fact, when you open your essay, your text, whatever it is you're writing with background information, it forces the reader to ask a question. Why should I care about this? Right? That's the first question readers are trying to answer when they start reading your text. Why should I care? And so we need to think about problem solution architecture to answer that question clearly right from the beginning. And there are some keywords that you can use from this, words like despite or however or but. Those are classics. As mentioned before, each community has their own special set of words that signal problems and value. So it's great if you can mine those from other successful writers in your niche. But basically what you're trying to do here is to use problem language to signal to the reader that this text is going to address the problem that they're dealing with. Step 12 is we want to organize everything, not just the introduction, but the rest of the piece as well around these problems and solutions. Right? So when you don't use this problem solution structure, then readers can't figure out why your ideas matter. All right? So of course, the whole text is going to be about a problem, but those problems are often composed of sub-problems. Right? So So imagine if you have a business, right? You're not making money. Well, that's a problem. But that problem is going to be composed of sub-problems, like I can't get new clients. Okay, and then that system itself is going to be composed of sub-problems, such as, where are my new leads coming from? How am I booking them on calls? There are these subsystems within it. So any problem is going to be composed of sub-problems, and those sub-problems are going to correspond with the paragraphs and the sections of your piece. So again, you've done all your discovery work, all your knowledge generation over in your writer's draft, but in your reader's draft, we're not taking any of that yet. We're thinking about, okay, what's the problem I've solved? Where's the reader at right now? And what are the sub-problems that I need to move them through in order to accept my final solution to this problem? Now, honestly, this problem solution structure is a bit of a conceit because we're not thinking about reader problems whenever we're doing our writing. Our writing is expressive, it's free, there's a lot of discovery in it. You can come up with so much new knowledge in that free writing session. But whenever we come over here to the reader's draft, well, we don't take any of that. We now need to think about the outline of the problems that our reader has to go through. And we need to think, okay, how can I mobilize my ideas as the solution to any of these problems or sub-problems? So here we're just thinking about an outline. What's the problem solution architecture that my reader needs to go through in order to accept my final idea, my solution to the problem, aka a thesis. Right, step 13 is learning how to disagree without making enemies. Now, honestly, I'm not the best at this. I can be a little bit flip on the internet, so take this all with a grain of salt, but it is something that we all have to learn. Because if your ideas are valuable, then they are going to be overturning the ideas of others. You are going to be disagreeing with other people. If you're not, then you're kind of off in a corner having a conversation with yourself. Right? All writing, I generally like to think about writing the way I think about any social interaction. Like think about speaking, right? For your speaking to be valuable, you need to enter into a discussion, right? Some people are having a conversation about something, and if you want them to perceive your speech as valuable, well, you don't start having a discussion about whatever it is you want to talk about. You kind of pick up where the last guy left off and you say, oh, well, Mr. So-and-so has an interesting idea. And, Mrs. So-and-so had a great contribution, but here's something that I think both of you are overlooking, which is, right, that would be a polite way to enter into a conversation. A bad way to enter into that conversation would be just to ignore what everybody was talking about and kind of say, well, you're stupid and you're wrong and you're ugly and here's my idea. But honestly, if you go on Twitter, like a lot of these places, that's what a lot of us do, myself included, right? So where was I? Okay, so if your ideas are going to be valuable, then it means you're going to be disagreeing with other people, right? Your ideas are going to be positioned against the ideas of others. So if you're right, it means that somebody else is wrong, or at least that their understanding is incomplete. But in either case, you're going to be challenging the existing thinking to create new knowledge. Okay, but if you just walk in the room and say you're wrong, well, it's going to make people quite defensive. And I see this a lot. Like just a quick example, there's this fantastic book by an academic who's living in my city here in Busan, South Korea, called The Cleanest Race. He's a North Korea scholar. And it's an amazing book. Oh my God, it's so good because he's kind of entering into this academic space where people are arguing about North Korea. And some people think that North Korea is a totalitarian state and other people think it's a fascist, communist state and whatever. They kind of have their academic disagreements about this. But he comes out swinging at everybody. He's like, you're all wrong. And he like the tone in the book is just so punchy and full of moxie. And he has this like really unique approach to understanding North Korea, which is to analyze their propaganda. This is an example that's coming in off the top of my head, but the point here is that here's an example of somebody who disagrees with everybody. It's like he's like Germany in World War II, like he's going to war with the world. But he doesn't pull any punches. And I don't really know how well that's gone for him. I can say as a reader, it's a hell of a book to read, but that style can make it challenging if you want to use your writing socially, right? If you want to use your writing to advance your career, make new relationships, have your ideas accepted by a community of peers. You need to learn how to modulate your claims and show deference, even if you disagree with the kind of big kahunas. You don't always have to do this. I mean, you can be whatever kind of writer you want. But the point is that it's if you don't show deference to the kind of ideas of the group, then it doesn't matter how right you are, as I think this academic is. I think his book is excellent. But I can imagine he got a lot of pushback from his own discourse community just for the tone, not for the quality of his ideas, but just for the tone that he brings to it. So you can't really advance the conversation if you can't disagree effectively. So the way to do this is to acknowledge the value of the existing thinking first. I call this a concession, right? So you've got, you can imagine in constructing your problem, you've got a status quo, which is the way that things are, or the kind of consensus that everybody agrees with. And before you dismantle that consensus to show what's wrong with it, you want to give a concession. Well, what's right about it? Even if you fundamentally disagree with it, you can put yourself in their shoes and say, well, what has been useful about this idea? What has this belief helped these believers do or accomplish? Give a tip of your hat to the idea before you totally come off the top ropes to dismantle it, because then you're going to introduce a destabilizing condition that shows the problem, and that's the place where your writing really gains its value. Step 14 is going to show you how to build better problems using research. Real research, okay? So many people these days are using AI to do their research, because I just think that using AI in your research is such a great case of confirmation bias. You go to your ChatGPT and you say, hey, ChatGPT, what is all the evidence that, I don't know, the earth is flat? And it's going to say, well, here's all, even if it says it seems unlikely, it's going to give you what you asked for. So I don't necessarily think that people who are using AI to do their research, and especially their literature reviews in academia, don't get me started, it's not leading to the best results. And so here's how you can actually use research to build better problems. Because a lot of writers, whenever they're using outside research, they'll bring in citations, they'll use a quote, and they'll just say, Smith says this, Jones argues that, right? They're basically just bringing this into the text to show that they've read an interesting book, or it's not useful to the reader. It doesn't create value. When you bring in outside research, what do you expect the reader to do with it? That's a question that I think too often goes unanswered. And when that question goes unanswered, then what you start to get is just a lot of citations that readers don't care about. I forget about academia. You see this on Substack. Somebody says, oh, I read this interesting book, or here's a quote from a writer I like. But again, readers don't care, right? They don't care what book you've read. You need to show them what do you want this quote to do? Right? That's the question we want to ask here is what is the function of this quote? What's the function of this citation? How is it moving the reader forward on this path from point A to point B? So the way to fix this is just to use research to create tension and contradiction, right? It's great if you can say something like Smith's findings conflict with Jones's conclusion, which creates uncertainty, right? Something like that. If you can show that there's this problem in the field, right? Here's a writer that we all like, and here's a piece of scholarship that, and now look, right? They don't agree. Okay, that's useful. So you want to use research in a way that makes situations more complex, more problematic, and not just more informed. Right? Moving on from structure, which is the problem solution structure of your writing, we're now going to talk about organization. All right, now this isn't going to be a finger wagging grammar class about your sentences and paragraphs, but I honestly think that the 80-20 for clarity in writing comes down to organization at the sentence level and the paragraph level. If you can just learn a few simple tricks about the way that you organize the information in your sentences and the way those kind of scale up into paragraphs, and you can be strategic about the way that you set this stuff up, you create what's called flow. When you understand organization, you create that elusive thing that writers are always chasing called flow. Flow is a very simple principle. You get it from just a few basic tricks that I'm going to show you in this section. And the first trick is just to keep your subjects consistent. All right, so there's this myth out there that we should avoid repetition in our writing. And so in keeping with this myth, writers believe that they should vary their subjects, the grammatical subject, like subject, verb, object. They think you shouldn't repeat anything in that subject position. So my name's William. You can imagine a paragraph that says, William recorded a video, and then William read a script, and William needed a drink of water, and that kind of thing. According to this myth, that style of writing is bad. But I'm here to say that it's fantastic. Having a consistent subject creates a really smooth reading experience. Okay, when you vary it just for the sake of variety, you make readers work harder to follow the logic and development of your ideas. The way that I illustrate this in my writing class is to ask students to imagine that they're watching a performance, like a play or a musical, right? Although there might be a lot of different characters in the production, at any given moment, there will only be 2 or maybe 3 characters on stage. And that's because any more than that, and it becomes overwhelming. You can't keep track of all their relationships with each other. Well, it's the same thing at the level of grammar. Right? If you're constantly varying the element that's in your subject position, then it's kind of like like every sentence tells a story. So imagine every sentence to be like, I don't know, an action. It is. Every sentence is an action. It has a verb in it. So every sentence is a kind of key action in the development of this musical. And you can imagine if the subject is always varying, it's like a different character performing a different action throughout the musical. And the viewers in the audience are just kind of darting back and forth. They're like, what is this scene about? Right? So the way to fix this is to pick 2 or maybe 3 main subjects for each section or each paragraph, and just don't just vary them for the sake of variety. You should pick one, and it's almost like you have the camera focused on it. Like, keep your focus on that subject, and each sentence and each clause is going to stay focused until you decide, I'm going to move the focus now over to this other key character in this section, right? Whenever you're strategic about what you put into the subject position, you help your readers keep focus on what matters most. Right now, of course, that can get a little bit overkill. So step 16 is to train your readers to understand your system for naming. So what do I mean? Well, of course, you wouldn't want a full paragraph or, even a whole section that says William did this and William did that and William did that. Of course, that's going to get monotonous. So there is good reason to vary the subject without referring to different entities. You don't just kind of want to keep saying William, William, William. You, of course, want to say he. But, now William and he, that gets a little bit drawn out. So you're going to need to develop a naming convention, some system of names that you're going to use to refer to that single entity. But of course, readers need to understand your system or they're going to get confused. If you start introducing random ways to refer to me as the English professor and the YouTuber, and if that comes, mid-text, then readers are going to be like, who is this? Right? So you need to train them. You need to get them ready for that kind of at the introduction of this character or this subject. Because if readers can't tell whether you're talking about the same thing or different things, then they're going to waste a lot of mental energy on trying to sort that out. So the way to fix this is to establish your variations, the various ways that you refer to that entity, early in the piece. So let's say, for example, you have a section that you're developing and the focus is going to be on customer retention software. Then you need to show readers that customer retention software and these platforms refer to the same thing. Before you start using this naming system, you want to train them early on in the text so that you can keep using it consistently throughout what follows. Right, so how do you choose the elements that go in the subject position, right? What are the characters that you're going to keep your focus on? Well, again, surprise, surprise, it all comes down to organizing the text around reader problems. All right, so writers, when they're just not thinking about the way they're organizing information at the sentence level, then honestly, the elements that appear in the subject position will be quite random. But readers follow problem-solving logic way easier. If you're consistently focused on that problem-solution structure and you organize your subjects accordingly, then oh god, readers will just sail through your text. But when sections are not organized to solve these problems, then it can feel quite random, and readers can't really figure out where you're going or why any of this matters, because all these random characters keep coming onto the stage. So the way to fix this is to ask, what's the next problem my reader needs solved, and then to structure the sections in the order that readers will encounter those problems. Of course, you want to use transitions to show the logical relationships between these moves and have the elements in the subject position be consistent with the appearance of those problems and solutions. All right, so I've been teasing this section as we've been going, but now it is time to talk about what really counts in your writing, which is value. In this section, I'm going to show you how to create value in your writing, because a lot of writers are worried about whether readers will actually want to read this. All right, they're afraid that their ideas are just going to be ignored or dismissed as being generic or something that's not special, not unique, and something that everybody already knows. And as I've been saying, I really don't buy it. For philosophical reasons, I truly believe that everybody has their own set of unique knowledge. We've all generated knowledge that the world deserves, and we can share that through our writing. But we need to know how to position those ideas in a way that readers will perceive as valuable. So that's what this section is all about. The first thing you want to do is master the words that signal importance. As we've already mentioned, there are specific code words that we use to signal value and importance. And there are big ones like however and but and the problem is, but there are also community-specific ones that we are going to learn and practice. And when writers just aren't thinking about this, they're not thinking about problems, they're not thinking about the way they're signaling to their reader importance or the appearance of problems or destabilizing situations, well, then the writing just feels so generic. And again, I've been kind of picking on Substack in this video, but I see a lot of AI writing there, and I see a lot of generic writing there, right? People are writing about topics that they're interested in, but they're not thinking about how to mobilize that interest into a way that readers will perceive as valuable. I'm not saying that, the ideas out there that we see in the world of self-publishing and online aren't valuable, but what I think people really need to think about is how they can position those ideas to be perceived as valuable by their readers. And whenever I help writers build this list, I basically like to break it up into 3 columns. All right, so you want to look for opportunity words. That might be words like enables or becomes, right? There are cost words, something like prevents or disrupts, and there are urgency words like critical or crucial. Now, again, there's going to be a lot of variety in this depending on your niche, so it's really important to examine 4 to 5 examples of prominent writing in your niche, the kind of people who have the audience that you want to speak to. You want to look at their writing and look for language that signals either opportunity or benefits, cost, and urgency, right? Find that vocabulary and then use those strategically in your own writing. It's step 19. You want to make the value obvious in every paragraph. All right, so whenever I talk about structure and organization, it's important to understand, again, none of this is about rules, but it's to understand reading patterns. And one of the patterns that readers use whenever they're interpreting a text is that they look to certain structural locations to find certain pieces of information. Like at the sentence level, readers expect to find information about the action, of course, in the verb, right? And they expect to find information about the location or the time in the adverb or prepositional phrase. So similarly, readers are looking at the paragraph level to find value. Now, where are readers looking for it, right? Are they looking at the end of the paragraph? Sometimes, but are they looking in the middle of the paragraph? No, they're looking usually at the start of the paragraph. Now, you probably hate to hear that because in your high school, you got hit over the head with all these lessons about topic sentences and claims and everything. But I'm just saying that every paragraph and every section should, at the top of it, indicate the value proposition, right? Because you're kind of making an agreement with the reader. You're saying, okay, well, here's a long section of text, and I know you're very busy, but if you read this, here's the value that you're going to get. Now, that's not like a copywriting trick. That's just the kind of social contract that we're entering into with readers. They're trading us their attention for value. And so we need to reassure them that we're going to be providing value, and we need to follow through on those promises. So what we want to do is at the beginning of every paragraph and larger section, however you've broken up your text, you want to make sure that the value is right where the reader is expecting to find it, which in most cases is going to be at the start. In some cases, if you want to be kind of storyteller and kind of lead them on, you could locate the value proposition at the end. If you really want to kind of use advanced skills, probably should not be buried in the middle. That's the point here. All right. So this is something I usually practice with clients who I'm editing for, right? I'll have them circle the value words and just circle them all throughout the text. And what I like to see is a lot of them loaded at the beginning, and then at least one value word at the start of every paragraph, right? In that first sentence, because that's a way of diagnosing problems. If we see a large section where we can't circle any value words, any of these problem words that signal urgency or problems or benefits, well, then we know that we need to, we have a problem that we need to fix. Step 20, home stretch. We want to make the costs and the benefits personal, right? It's not really enough to sketch out a problem. We need to show the reader the consequence of not fixing this problem. And that could be something personal to the reader or something that will affect a cause or a situation that the reader cares about. So again, this all comes down to the reader, right? So we're talking about the difference between saying, this creates some inconsistencies or this is a contradiction, right? That feels just so academic and like conceptual and abstract. Contrast that with saying this prevents you from retaining your best customers. All right, that's urgent. That's something that the reader can feel. That's food taken off the table and out of the mouth of the reader. They understand what the problem is because we've identified the consequence of not solving that problem. All right, so as you're structuring your problems, you want to make the consequences of those problems specific and personal. And you can do that. You can take the same problem and identify the different consequences based on the different reader groups you might have. In fact, academics will do this. They'll have their research, their argument, and one day they might present it before a community of their colleagues. And of course, the stakes of that problem are going to be different. So the consequences of that problem are going to be one thing, and it's going to be abstract and conceptual and that kind of thing. But then they might go down the street and present it at a local community center for people who have never read anything in this field. Well, a good academic is somebody who can still talk about their field of expertise and show why it matters to the grannies and the children down at the local library, right? So it's the same problem, but they've adapted the consequences and the stakes of that problem to match their audience. And there are two sides of this, right? You can show the cost of those problems. So you can say, this problem will limit your ability to do something, or you can show what your solution to that problem enables them to do, right? This idea allows you to do something. The next phase of the expert writing system is to understand reader psychology. So when you start writing and sharing your stuff online, it can often feel like you're shouting into the void. And you wonder, how do I actually connect with my audience? Well, if you're not hearing anything back, then probably you're struggling to understand what your readers actually want. And so maybe people are reading what you've written, but it feels disconnected and it's hard for you to build a relationship with your readers unless you understand them. But when you start to understand the way that readers think and what motivates them, you can learn to anticipate their objections and build authority without coming across as arrogant. Again, this is all social stuff, but we forget about the kind of social behavior that happens between readers and writers. So step 21 is to beat readers to their objections. But like a lot of writers will just present their ideas assuming that readers are just going to accept them. But as any psychologist will tell you, people do not like to change their ideas. They don't want to hear that they're wrong about something or that they have to do something differently. So we can assume that our readers are actively looking for reasons to doubt us, especially when our ideas require any effort or change in lifestyle or behavior. And when you don't address these objections, then it basically undermines your whole argument. Like, this is actually something they teach in sales too. You need to design a sales letter, a kind of sales script to address all of the objections, right? Because the buyer is going to have objections to spending money. Oh, I need to talk to my wife. Oh, I need to wait until I get paid. Oh, they're always going to find some reason to not part with their money. And if you don't have a way of meeting all those objections, all of them, then they're gonna find one, and that's gonna be the one that gets them off the hook. So similarly, when you are trying to, not sell something, but sell readers on your idea and your argument, then you need to handle all of their objections. And if you miss any of them, then they basically just think that you don't understand the situation and they're not going to accept your ideas or suggestions. So the fix here is, for every major claim, you want to anticipate the top 3 objections. And this is pretty easy because there are basically only 3 objections that you ever hear to a new idea. Right? It could be, there are causes to this problem other than the ones that you have identified. There are counter examples that contradict the examples that you've provided, so you've left out some evidence. Or, I don't define this term in the same way that you define it. All right, so there might be some other ways of disagreeing, but generally, if you look at counter arguments, it's usually going to fall in one of those 3 buckets. So why don't you just anticipate that? For every claim you make, try to answer those questions before they come up. Step 22 is, you want to make readers feel personally invested in your writing. Right? Because when you write abstractly and impersonally, then, well, on the plus side, it can make you sound authoritative and professional, and that's something that's often recommended in professional circles. But honestly, there's nothing wrong with using personal pronouns, you and I, in the text. It can create a personal relationship with your reader, and I think that's quite persuasive, because if the reader feels a connection with the authorial voice, the writer in the text, then they're going to be a lot more likely to accept his suggestions and to be persuaded by his ideas. So I would say, don't be afraid of using personal language. You can inject humor. You can talk about personal anecdotes. The thing I want to stress here is that writing is social. So we don't need these stuffy rules about, how to be impersonal in your writing and how to come off professionally. Your language choices determine the relationship that you have with your reader. And if readers feel good about you, that is you, the you that lives on the page, then they will be more likely to be persuaded by your ideas. So of course, don't overdo it. I read a book recently that was just filled with the pronoun you. And it was almost like the writer had written a journal to himself. It was like he was talking to himself. You need to lock in and you need to focus and this kind of stuff. So it can be done poorly. Don't overdo it. But I would say, don't be afraid of using personal language, because that can create a bond between you and your reader if done well. Step 23 is when we need to find a healthy balance between sounding confident without sounding too arrogant, because we're in the business of persuasion here in nonfiction writing. And so we need to be convincing. We need to show the reader that we're quite confident in our ideas, but without going too far with that. And there's a certain set of language choices we can do to get those ideas across. This comes up with a lot of academics who I work with, whose writing is filled with what we call hedges. So words like perhaps, or verbs like seems, could be, those are kinds of hedges which modulate their level of confidence in the strength of the claim. And those are the language items that we use in order to control our level of confidence. But we also have to use the right level of confidence for the audience. And I think, scientists and academics are generally a lot more careful in making their claims because they're writing for a community that kind of exists based on this culture of peer review, right? They're expecting their audience to like vehemently attack their ideas because that's part of their process of truth finding. But it doesn't really work when we export those language behaviors into other niches and domains. And if you use too many of them, then it's going to undermine your ideas, right? Like many other audiences outside of academia really don't like that and don't respect that level of hedging, right? It makes you seem unconfident in your ideas, and why would they listen to somebody who's not confident in their ideas? So again, this is a social thing. It's a cultural thing. It's this kind of being careful about the strength of your claims is respected in certain cultures and academia, but it really doesn't work in many other fields. But on the other side, we can't go too far with our level of confidence because then you just come across as arrogant and people dismiss your ideas out of hand without even considering them because you sound like a jackass. So we need to balance these. How can we do that? Well, I think in general, nonfiction writing, you want to make direct, confident statements and always make sure that your claims are supported by evidence that your reader is going to accept. Now, again, depending on your field, that evidence can come from a variety of different sources, but every claim, like I always kind of say that a claim or an idea has three parts. There's a truth claim, which is your attempt to say something true about the world, and then that is going to be supported by evidence and then reasoning, what we call in the field of writing, we call them warrants, explanations of how the evidence supports the claim. So you're always going to need those three pieces for any idea. So in your claims, be confident, be strident, but always make sure that they're backed up by solid evidence and clear reasoning that readers will follow and accept. Now, whenever I get writers started with this system of expert writing, they can still deal with this fear of publishing. They might have written 2 or 3 pieces, but they're afraid of sharing it because they don't want to put any work out there that damages their reputation. These writers would rather not publish than risk looking incompetent or being judged. And it's funny because they end up with this kind of paradox, these two fears, right? The fear that nobody is going to read anything I write, and the fear that everybody is going to read what I write and they're going to judge me for it. Well, both of those cannot be true at the same time. So why don't we dismantle this second fear, the fear that everybody is going to judge you, by giving you some quality control steps that you can follow. This is going to be a systematic way to ensure that your writing meets the standards of your readership before anybody sees it. So you're not going to be second guessing yourself. You know what your audience is expecting and you're delivering that. That's quality control. And the first step in this system is to audit everything for, what's that keyword? Value. But it's really important, so stick with me. So editors like me are famous for just cutting. We say, cut this, delete that, move this over there, right? And writers can feel like, well, that's really hard to accept because you put so much work into this. So what I deal with a lot is writers who want to keep things in their draft, in their manuscript, because it's either true or interesting. But all this cutting, from my perspective, comes down to value. What's the value? How is this step going to provide value to the reader? How is it going to solve their problem? How is it going to develop their understanding of the problem? How does this sentence, this section, this paragraph create value? And if you can't answer that question, if you're just including stuff in your writing because it's true or it's interesting or just because you wrote it and so, hey, I put the work in, I want to keep it in, well, what are you actually doing? You are diluting the impact of your ideas and you're wasting your reader's time. The most precious resource you have as a writer is your reader's attention. So if you're fighting to keep weak content in your manuscript, it's wasting space and it's also undermining the best ideas that you have. So whenever I'm editing manuscripts, here's the question that I ask, and you can just beat me to it and do it yourself, which is, why should my reader care? Right? What problem does this paragraph, this quote, this section, what problem does it solve? So if you can't identify that value, either rewrite it or delete it. Step 25, use the so what test. Writers often assume that their readers will understand why the information matters. Or again, they go to arguments like it's true or it's interesting or they just want to leave it in because it's neat. But the fact is, if you don't spell it out, if you don't link this information to the question, so what, then you're asking readers to do unnecessary work. Like, they can read and they can interpret, and that's one level of work. But if you're not making clear connections between your ideas, then you're ramping this up and having them do this extra work of sorting out, okay, well, why is this related to that? And what's the point? What's the point here? So what? And so that's the problem that this so what test is meant to solve. Every major point in your writing should let readers easily answer the question, what does this do for me? What does it mean for me? Why should I care? Now, if you're explaining your thinking process instead of solving problems, then it's time to rewrite it. The second quality control check is to remove everything that makes reading hard. Ta-da! Fantastic point. No, but I'm serious. We need to think about the reading process. I remember reading David Foster Wallace say something about this in an interview with Brian Garner. He said, like, good writing basically just comes down to the reader's cognitive experience. Like, there's work that they need to do in order to decode our language into ideas in their mind. And the easier that decoding process is, the better the writer is. But it's really just a matter of making that interpretation process as easy and unambiguous as possible. So what we want to do in this quality controls check is to remove everything that makes that process hard. All right, easier said than done. What does that actually mean? Well, as you know, the language patterns that helped you think in the writing process, they interfere with the language patterns that help readers process information. Both of you are using the text differently. And so that makes reading feel difficult, because if you leave in these thinking patterns, these writing patterns, you're going to make that process of decoding harder, even when your ideas are good and valuable. Now, when readers hit these interference patterns, they slow down, they get frustrated, and that creates negative associations with you and your ideas. And so what we want to do here is remove writer-focused language. So that could be things like giving a lot of background or chronological organization, or just explanations of your thought processes and the kind of steps that you went through in discovering the solutions. We want to remove those so that the text matches the reader's process of thinking through these things. And what do I mean by reader-focused language patterns? Well, that harkens back to an earlier section, but it has everything to do with your problem architecture, right? The way that you lay out the problem and the process through which the reader goes in understanding the causes and the solutions to that problem. Step 27 is to test your writing with real people. Now, that could be an editor or beta readers, but what it comes down to is you want to see the reaction that people have with your text, because you can only guess until you actually see somebody trying to use your text as a reader. Then you never really know whether it's any good or whether your ideas are coming through. Now, of course, this can happen in a lot of different ways. Writers know they can share their work with other people and get feedback, and that's very valuable. But a great example that I've seen of this in practice is Paul Millard, who has since published a book, but when he was kind of developing the materials for this book, The Pathless Path, he did something great that I really think all writers should try to do, which is to connect with his audience. He was writing, I think, on Substack, and he would have one-on-one Zoom meetings with his readers. He called them curiosity conversations. No structure, no, particular goal with these conversations, but he would just meet them and talk to them and learn about the things they were interested in. And I think that's fantastic, because you want to know the people who are resonating with your work. As you really develop this kind of avatar for your reader, your writing becomes so much more focused to their interests and their reading patterns. So anything you can do to, like often writers will share their work with other writers because those are people who we respect and we want to know, what they think of our craft. But honestly, the best feedback that you can get is from readers, and writers should not be too shy to share their early work and their drafts and their kind of messy ideas and their fragments. early with their audience, because that's the feedback that counts. It doesn't matter what the editor thinks or what your writer friends think of your paper. They're not really the ones you're writing for. It's your readers. So if you have a kind of even smaller fledgling audience, you share with them your best work and see what they think about it, because their reaction is going to give you details about the reading process and the reading patterns that they use when they're going through your text. And now for a quick fire bonus round, where I'm going to tell you some writing habits that you can practice daily, success indicators that tell you that you're moving in the right direction, and a practical guide to start writing today. Daily habits. Before writing, ask, what specific value am I creating? When you start writing, begin with a reader problem, never background. First drafts, write for your thinking and ignore readers. Revision, completely rewrite for readers. Don't just edit your first draft. Before publishing, circle all the value creation words. If there are large gaps between them, you've got a problem. Now, you know that you're practicing expert writing when readers actually do things based on your writing, when you can predict their objections before they even think of them, when your writing feels valuable to people who disagree with you, when you write faster because you know your readers' reading patterns and their secret codes, when people share and reference your work online because it's helpful to them. Now look, knowing these principles is just the starting point. The real magic happens when you put them into practice. But here's what most people get wrong. They try to apply all of these steps at once and end up overwhelmed and paralyzed. So watch this video next, because it's going to show you exactly how to implement this system step by step, walking you through the specific practice routine that I developed that's a perfect balance between creative discovery and scientific precision, so you can start writing with confidence instead of constantly second-guessing yourself. So be sure to go check it out.